Welcome to the mysterious casebook. In the hush of a London morning, a glass shattered without a soul near it. Tonight, step into the shadows with Sherlock Holmes in The Glass That Shattered Without Touch. Are you watching with the lights on or off? Then draw the curtains close and let the mystery begin. It began, as so many of our singular adventures did, with a sound that did not belong. A sharp, crystalline note, like the sudden cry of a glass in agony, pierced the quiet of Baker Street. I started from my chair, half believing it came from our own window panes, yet the air about us was utterly still. Holmes, who had been leaning over a small retort near the fire, lifted his head slightly. "You heard it too, Watson," he said softly. "That is no accident of acoustics." Before I could respond, there came a firm, almost desperate knock upon the door below. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps echoed on the stair, quick and uncertain. The next instant the door flew open and a young woman entered, pale, gloved, and visibly trembling. Her hat sat askew, and the lace veil quivered as she clutched her reticule. "The glass," she gasped. "It shattered, and no one was near it." Holmes motioned her to the chair by the hearth, his eyes already alight. "Compose yourself, madam. You are safe here. Dr. Watson, a little brandy." As I poured, she pressed a hand to her temple. The tremor in her fingers matched the faint, tinkling sound that still seemed to linger in the air, as though that impossible shattering had imprinted itself upon the room. "My name is Clara Elmsworth," she began. "It happened not 10 minutes ago, in my father's conservatory at Highbury Crescent. We were at breakfast when the sound of a sudden crash of glass came, and when we looked, the great bay window lay in fragments, but there was no stone, no bird, nothing. The gardener was outside trimming roses. He swears no one passed the gate." Holmes steepled his fingers. "And the window, did it bear any mark before breaking? A crack? A flaw?" "None," she said. "My father had only yesterday remarked upon its clarity. It was new glass, fitted but a month ago." Holmes rose, pacing the hearthrug. "New glass, perfect condition, yet it shatters spontaneously before witnesses. How extraordinary! Pray, Miss Elmsworth, was there anyone else in the room?" "My father, my brother Henry, and myself." And she hesitated. "Mr. Hatherley, a family acquaintance." "He visits often, though my father has lately grown uneasy about him." Holmes's gaze flickered to me with that faint amusement that so often heralded a scent worth following. "Uneasy, Miss Elmsworth? In what sense?" "He is, how shall I put it, absorbed in strange experiments. He calls them harmonic demonstrations. Once he brought a small tuning device that produced tones so high one could hardly bear them. He said certain frequencies might move objects or even destroy them." "Ah," murmured Holmes, a student of resonance. He crossed to the window and drew the curtains an inch, the dull city light falling upon his lean features. "Watson, do you recall the tale of the goblet that bursts beneath a perfect note? A scientific curiosity rarely achieved, but real. Suppose our visitor has discovered a means of applying it on a larger scale." Miss Elmsworth shuddered. "Then you think—" "I think nothing yet," said Holmes briskly. "Only that coincidence and curiosity seldom dwell in the same house." He took his hat and coat. "Watson, if you would be so good, our patient's pulse seems steady enough to endure the journey. Miss Elmsworth, you will accompany us to Highbury Crescent." The carriage ride passed in tense silence. At intervals, Holmes tapped the side of the seat with a measured rhythm, as though counting unseen intervals. When we arrived, the conservatory stood before us like a wounded thing, its broad bay window reduced to glittering shards across the tiles. Holmes knelt, examining the frame. No mark of impact, no projectile. Only the thin metallic ring that echoed faintly when he brushed a finger along the iron mullion. "That note again," he murmured. The same pitch as before, Watson. I heard it took a resonance within the metal, fading like a whisper, swallowed by air. At the threshold, a tall gentleman emerged, grey-haired, severe, and with eyes that carried the authority of habit. "You are the gentleman Miss Elmsworth has fetched." "I am Colonel Elmsworth. My patience for parlour tricks is limited, Mr. Holmes. If this is some scientific jest by Hatherley, I shall have him horsewhipped." Holmes bowed. "Your indignation does you credit, Colonel. Might I see where each of you stood when the incident occurred?" The Colonel gestured curtly. "My seat there, Clara beside me, Henry by the door, Hatherley near the fern stand." Holmes stepped into that space, eyes half closed, his fingers tracing invisible lines through the air. "The window faced south," he murmured. "The glass tempered, thick, yet its fragments lie outward, not inward. That is significant." "Outward?" I repeated. "Yes." The force began within the room. Miss Elmsworth gasped softly. The faint tremor returned the tiniest chime from a fragment beneath my boot. Holmes straightened. "Colonel, did Mr. Hatherley bring any device with him today?" The old soldier's jaw set. He carried a small case that said it contained a tuning fork of his own making. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then I must meet this musical gentleman." "He left immediately after the accident," Clara whispered. "He seemed frightened." Holmes turned toward her, his tone suddenly quiet. "Frightened men sometimes flee their own handiwork, Miss Elmsworth, but more often they flee what they have only half understood." A faint tremor passed through the frame again, like a sigh from metal, recalling its pain. Holmes tilted his head, listening. "Watson," he said softly, "there's our motif, the sound that should not be. Remember it well, for I fancy before nightfall it will sing again." Holmes's hand hovered near the iron frame, his ear inclined to it as though listening for a voice that only he could discern. "There," he murmured. "Do you perceive it, Watson? A faint echo, not of impact, but of vibration residual, yet alive." I strained to hear and caught only a thin shimmer in the air, as if the room itself remembered pain. The fragments on the floor trembled faintly against each other with the motion of our breath. Colonel Elmsworth frowned. "If you mean to tell me that the window broke because of a tune, sir, I shall not attune," Holmes interrupted quietly. "A frequency. Music is organized emotion, Colonel. Resonance, organized destruction. Tell me, where might we find Mr. Hatherley?" The Colonel hesitated, and Clara's voice supplied the answer. "He keeps rooms at Bloomsbury, near the old library on Museum Street." "Excellent," said Holmes. "Watson, a cab. And, Colonel, if you would be so kind as to prevent anyone from sweeping these fragments until my return. I have a suspicion that each shard carries a record of the event, though not in ink." The Colonel's brows knitted. "By heaven, sir, I'll humour you. But if this fellow has endangered my household, Holmes was already at the door, his coat swirling, and he will learn that sound can wound more than glass, Colonel." The cab wheels sang along the cobbles, the rhythm merging with the lingering tone that seemed to accompany us from the conservatory. Holmes sat in silence, eyes distant, fingers beating the same triplet pattern against the doorframe. I recognized that his mind was calibrating something invisible, measuring the world by its unseen tremors. "Holmes," I ventured, "you believe this Hatherley deliberately shattered the glass?" He did not answer at once. "Deliberately? No. Intentionally, perhaps. There is a distinction. Some men conduct experiments in pursuit of applause, others in pursuit of understanding. The dangerous sort are those who experiment to prove themselves right." He smiled thinly. "And those, my dear Watson, are often the easiest to catch. When we reached Museum Street, the house we sought was an unimpressive brick affair, the sort of lodging that bears the weary respectability of endless rent receipts. A caretaker led us up to the second floor. "Mr. Hatherley went out not an hour past, sir," she said, wringing her hands. "Seemed in a great hurry, left his breakfast untasted." Holmes's eyes flicked to the table. "Yet his violin remains," he observed. "And what is this?" On the chair lay a small mahogany case, partly open. Within it gleamed a fork of unusual design, its prongs wider, its stem weighted with lead. Holmes lifted it delicately. "You see, Watson, not for music, its pitch would be beyond the human ear. Observe the inscription AH, number 3. The man is systematic. There will be a number 1 and number 2 somewhere." He tapped the fork gently against the heel of his boot. A faint shimmer pulsed through the air, scarcely audible, yet the glass of the window quivered in reply. Holmes stilled it with a geeky fingertip. "Ah, responsive medium," he muttered. "But there must be more." He crossed to the mantel, where a notebook lay open beside a heap of folded papers. On one page, a sketch of a conservatory window precisely drawn, its measurements annotated with small notations of tone, A3E5C6. Holmes's brow furrowed. He is mapping frequency to dimension, attempting to prove that every structure has its sympathetic note. "A dangerous hobby," I said, peering over his shoulder. "Indeed, and one that may have already claimed its first victim if my instincts are sound." "Victim?" I echoed. "You think someone was harmed?" Holmes's eyes lifted to the corner of the room, where a faint tinkling noise had begun like the whisper of a bell. "Listen, even silence leaves residue. The glass sings when no one touches it." "Tell me, Watson, what if the resonance that shatters windows could be tuned to more fragile vessels like the human heart?" I stared at him. "Good heavens, Holmes, surely you cannot." But he had already closed the notebook, pocketed the tuning fork, and turned sharply toward the door. "We must find Hatherley before he tests a higher pitch." Down the stair we went, the sound motif following us like a ghostly breath, the hum of wheels, the faint echo from the instrument case now clutched beneath Holmes's arm. Outside, the city's noise swallowed us, yet the resonance persisted beneath it all, as though the world itself vibrated in sympathy with our pursuit. At the cab stand, Holmes paused, driver Highbury Crescent again, but swiftly. The man cracked his whip, and we plunged once more into the moving chorus of London. Holmes leaned forward. "There is a truth buried in that window's collapse, Watson. Consider the force was inward, not outward, the cause within, not without. Suppose the human voice or an artificial imitation of it could be tuned precisely to the window's resonant frequency. The effect would be invisible, instantaneous, and, to the untrained ear, supernatural. Then you suspect Hatherley performed his experiment without warning the household?" Holmes nodded. "Or perhaps he meant to demonstrate control and lost it. Pride is the loudest frequency of all. When we arrived, dusk had begun to settle. Colonel Elmsworth stood waiting at the gate, his face grim. "You return in good time," he said. "There's been another sound fainter from the library this time. My son swears he saw the glass lamp tremble." Holmes's step quickened. "Show me." Inside, the air was thick with unease. Clara stood by the door, her hands clasped, her eyes darting toward the shelves. A single lamp hung over the writing desk, its glass shade humming with a barely perceptible vibration. Holmes approached it slowly, every movement measured. "Watson, hold your breath," he whispered. The room fell still. From somewhere distant came a soft, steady, tone-high, continuous, deliberate. Then, as if struck by invisible fingers, the lamp began to ring. Holmes seized the shade and twisted it free, smothering the resonance. Someone nearby is producing that note. I can feel it through the floor. He pressed his palm against the boards, eyes half closed. There under us. A cellar, perhaps, or service tunnel. Colonel Elmsworth paled. Good God, the wine vault lies beneath this room. Holmes rose. Well, then our elusive Mr. Hatherley may have returned to tune his masterpiece. The sound swelled faintly again, rising in pitch until the edges of the glass on the shelves began to sing. Holmes motioned us toward the stair. Quickly, gentlemen, the proof is about to break itself. We descended into the narrow passage beneath the library, each step accompanied by that trembling tone higher, sharper, perilously near the threshold of pain. The air itself seemed to quiver. Holmes raised a hand. Watson, steady your nerves. What we are about to see may not be music, but it will certainly be performance. The passage narrowed, each of our footsteps striking an echo that merged with the relentless hum. It was no ordinary sound now. It seemed to live within the walls, vibrating through the plaster, through the marrow of our bones. Holmes motioned for silence and stooped low, his lamp casting a trembling glow along the descending stair. "Watson," he murmured, "that frequency is deliberately sustained. He is maintaining it with precision." We reached the bottom, where a heavy oak door stood ajar. From within came a cold, metallic shimmer, and then a sudden, wavering thrum as if some hidden instrument strained against its own pitch. Holmes eased the door wider. Mr. Arthur Hatherley stood at the centre of the vault, his coat discarded, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on a peculiar contraption mounted upon a tripod. A network of wires ran from its base to a pair of small tuning forks that glowed faintly red from friction. His hand hovered over a control dial, and his lips moved as though counting time. "Mr. Hatherley," Holmes's voice cut through the vibration like a whip crack. The man started, his hand jerking against the device. The pitch leapt to a shrill, almost unbearable note. Glass bottles on the shelves trembled, and one burst into dust. Holmes sprang forward, wrenching the dial backward. The tone faltered and died. Hatherley wheeled upon him, wild-eyed. "You've ruined it." "Do you know what you've done?" "I should hope," said Holmes calmly. "I have prevented the second act of a tragedy." The man staggered, pressing his palms to his ears. "It was meant to prove harmony, not harm. I was perfecting resonance, pure resonance, until the window broke." "I never intended." Holmes raised a hand. "Spare me intent, sir. What interests me is control. You sought to reproduce what occurred this morning, did you not?" Hatherley's shoulders sagged. "I needed to measure my strength. The bay window was a fine test. I had balanced the frequencies exactly, but something interfered." Holmes's eyes sharpened. "Something or someone?" The man hesitated, glancing toward the stair. "Colonel Elmsworth despises my work. He forbade Clara to attend my demonstrations. He thinks I'm a charlatan." "And so," Holmes said softly, "you resolved to dazzle him by shattering his new conservatory glass before his very eyes." Hatherley flushed. "I wished to astonish, not to destroy." "But destruction was the inevitable consequence," Holmes returned, "and perhaps not the only one." He knelt before the machine, examining the arrangement of coils and diaphragms. "Watson, observe an electromagnetic driver here, coupled to a resonator. Ingenious, but unstable. Once the tone reaches critical amplitude, it will escalate beyond control." Hatherley ran a trembling hand through his hair. "It should not have exceeded 12,000 vibrations." "I calculated the limit precisely." "Then your arithmetic was as faulty as your morality," Holmes said coldly. "You exposed a household to peril to gratify your vanity." Clara's voice sounded from behind us, frightened but steady. "Mr. Hatherley, why did you return here?" He turned sharply, surprise breaking through his guilt. "Miss Ellsworth, you should not be—" "I wished to understand what you had done," she said. "Father believes you meant Harm. The inventor's face twisted. I meant discovery. If you had seen what I've achieved, sound that moves matter, tone that commands structure, you'd know I stood on the edge of revelation. Holmes straightened. You stand, sir, on the edge of arrest. The law takes a dim view of revelations that endanger life. The man's defiance faltered, then collapsed into despair. You don't understand. It wasn't only the window. Something else occurred. When the glass broke, I heard voices, not human voices, stones speaking back. It was as if the world answered me. Holmes's gaze hardened. Hallucination born of overexposure, nothing more. You have tampered with frequencies beyond human tolerance, Watson. See how his pupils contract, classic symptoms of vibratory fatigue. I nodded grimly. He'll need rest and examination. Holmes turned again to the device. Before that, I must know one thing. Colonel Elmsworth's library lamp, did you set your instrument beneath it? I left the first prototype there last night, Hatherley admitted. A smaller emitter set to a passive cycle. It should have been inert unless a specific harmonic was reintroduced. Holmes finished. Which you have just provided from this cellar. You've tuned both rooms to the same frequency, setting them in sympathy like paired strings. Had we arrived minutes later, the entire house might have collapsed. A silence followed, dense and oppressive. Even the faint hum of the machine seemed ashamed. Clara clasped her hands, her voice trembling. Mr. Holmes, can it be stopped? Holmes's fingers moved swiftly across the controls. Yes, by detuning, introducing a counter-frequency of equal amplitude. He adjusted the dial fractionally. A low, soothing tone rose, blending with the residual vibration, until both dissolved in quiet. There, he said, exhaling. Equilibrium restored. The relief in the room was palpable. Hatherley sank to a stool, staring blankly at his creation. It was to be my triumph, he whispered. Sound that obeys command beauty in precision. I never dreamt it could defy me. Holmes regarded him with a curious mixture of pity and severity. Man may master nature's tones, sir, but not without consequence. Every law of harmony demands restraint. Clara moved forward, compassion overcoming fear. Arthur, you must destroy it. He gave a faint, broken laugh. Destroy my life's work? Holmes's reply was quiet but firm. Better that than let it destroy another's. A sudden metallic crack interrupted him, the same faint resonance returning from the floorboards, sharper now, as though the cellar itself resisted silence. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Watson, he said, that counter-frequency did not nullify entirely. There remains a residual vibration, something foreign to this device. He bent, pressing his ear against the stones. The sound deepened, hollow and rhythmic, echoing from beneath the foundations. That, Holmes said in a low voice, is not mechanical. Hatherley's face was drained of colour. You mean another instrument? Perhaps, Holmes answered, or perhaps something these walls conceal. Whatever it is, the resonance continues, and until we trace its source, none of us may rest. The tone rose again, so faint that it seemed more memory than sound, yet it carried through the silence like a breath from the earth itself. Holmes straightened, his expression unreadable. Come, Watson, he said, bring the lamp. We must go deeper still. Holmes led the way, the lamp held low, its glow catching damp brick and curling mist. The echo from below deepened into a steady pulse, neither mechanical nor wholly natural, yet insistent as a heartbeat. Each step downward made the air denser, as though the sound itself thickened it. Mind your footing, Watson, Holmes said softly. These stairs were not intended for frequent passage. Hatherley followed a pace behind, clutching his coat tight, his eyes haunted. I never knew of any further cellar. My apparatus was set upon the foundation. There should be nothing beneath it. Then your foundation, Holmes murmured, rests upon someone else's secret. The last step delivered us to a low corridor of stone, its walls glistening with condensation. The hum became stronger here, not loud, but resonant enough that the lamp flame trembled in sympathy. Holmes knelt, touching the wall. "Note this, Watson. The vibration travels laterally, not upward. We follow the path of least resistance." Clara hesitated at the stair's mouth. "Mr. Holmes, must we go farther?" "It is safer that we do, Miss Elmsworth," he replied. "What remains hidden often proves more dangerous than what declares itself." We advanced cautiously. After some 20 paces, the corridor opened into a vaulted chamber lined with dusty wine racks. At its centre stood an object utterly foreign to its surroundings, a massive, bell-shaped vessel of glass, perhaps 4 feet high, bound in a copper lattice. Coils of wire ran from its base into the floor. It was this strange construction that pulsed with the low, continuous tone. Holmes approached, his gaze narrowing. "Observe, Watson, the form of a resonator, yet of vastly larger scale than Hatherley's contraption, and older. Look at the oxidation of the copper." Hatherley stared in disbelief. "I swear to you I never built this. It's impossible." Holmes examined the wiring. "Not impossible merely prior. Whoever occupied this house before your family, Colonel Elmsworth, was already courting resonance on a formidable scale." Colonel Elmsworth, who had followed us down with grim resolve, stiffened. "The property belonged to Professor Lendrick 30 years ago. An eccentric physicist vanished abroad, or so the papers claimed." Holmes turned sharply. "Lendrick, you say? Watson, do you recall the symposium I attended at the Royal Society in 1809? Lendrick presented a paper on the harmonics of inorganic matter. He proposed that every substance possesses a natural voice, one that might be summoned or destroyed by sound alone. The theory was dismissed as dangerous nonsense." I nodded slowly. "And now his device hums beneath a family dining room?" "Precisely," Holmes said. "I believe, Watson, we have discovered the ghost that sings." Hatherley approached the vessel, trembling. "Then it wasn't my experiment that broke the window, it was this thing responding to me." Holmes inclined his head. "You struck its sympathetic note, sir, and awakened a sleeper. The destruction upstairs was but an echo of what lies beneath." Clara's voice quivered. "Can it be silenced?" Holmes studied the glass. "Every sound may be countered. But first, we must know what feeds it." He traced the wires to a small box embedded in the wall. Opening it revealed a series of tuning forks mounted in parallel, each labelled with pitch and number. Holmes drew in a breath. Extraordinary. A mechanical Quaritch fork vibrating at a constant frequency. Some mechanism must keep them alive. The Colonel frowned. "But there's no power down here." "Then the vibration is self-sustaining," Holmes said grimly. "A closed system of resonance feeding upon its own echo." He turned to me. "Watson, if those frequencies align perfectly with Hatherley's, the effect could propagate through the entire structure." "Then the danger remains?" I asked. "Indeed, and grows with every note." He stooped to examine the copper frame again. "This instrument amplifies the smallest vibration until matter yields. Imagine what might occur if it found the tone of bone or blood." Clara shuddered. "Please, stop it." Holmes's expression softened. "That is my intention." He produced a small tuning fork from his pocket, the one taken from Hatherley's case, and struck it lightly. The pitch rose pure and clear. Immediately the glass vessel answered with a subtle oscillation, a shimmer of light along its surface. Holmes adjusted the angle, searching. "There is a sympathetic point." "Holmes," I said anxiously, "if you increase the resonance," he gave a faint smile, "then we shall either cure the malady or collapse the house, my dear fellow. Science often demands proximity to danger. Hatherley stepped forward suddenly. "Allow me! It's my doing folly!" He seized the fork and struck it harder. The air quaked. The bell-shaped vessel glowed white, its tones swelling until it pierced the ear like ice. Clara cried out. Holmes grabbed the man's wrist. "Fool! Too high a pitch!" He twisted the fork sideways against the wall, forcing its sound to break. The vessel shuddered once, then dimmed to a faint hum. For a moment, silence reigned, thick, absolute. Then, from somewhere deeper within the wall, another sound began. Lower, slower bass vibration that made the floor shift beneath our feet. Holmes's voice cut through the dread. "There's another chamber. Lendrick built more than one resonator." Hatherley stared, horror dawning. He meant to link them, to create a chain reaction sound traveling through the earth itself. Holmes turned toward the colonel. "Your house sits atop a network of these devices, sir. If one awakens, it may awaken all." The colonel swore softly. "Then, for the safety of my family, destroy them." "I intend to," Holmes replied. "Watson, assist me in cutting these leads. We must break the chain before the lower tone ascends." We worked swiftly, wrenching at the copper wires. Each severed strand released a faint spark, as though the sound itself resisted surrender. Holmes's face was set, his movements surgical. At last the tone faded to near silence. He exhaled. "There. We've muted the immediate danger." But even as he spoke, a faint note answered from above, a gentle, crystalline chime, unmistakable and hauntingly familiar. Clara whispered, "That sound, it's in the conservatory again?" Holmes lifted his head, listening. "Yes, Watson, the melody has moved upstairs." He extinguished the lamp. "Our battle with silence is far from over." We emerged from the cellar into darkness, broken only by the faint, crystalline echo from above. It sang in brief intervals 3 notes, always the same, as though some unseen hand struck the air like a bell. Holmes was already in motion, his lantern sweeping along the corridor. "Quickly, Watson! The vibration has migrated upward. We must intercept it before the frequency compounds." Clara clung to the stair rail, her face ghostly in the lamplight. "It's the same sound as before, only clearer." Holmes nodded. "Because the resonator below has transferred its harmonic to the glass above. The house itself has become an instrument, Miss Elmsworth, and someone or something is playing it." We reached the conservatory. Moonlight pooled across the shards of the earlier disaster, each fragment glinting faintly as though alive. Holmes knelt among them, motioning for silence. A soft breath of air passed through the broken frame, and the sound came again, a pure, mournful tone that trembled in the bones. Holmes whispered, "Do you observe, Watson? The sound does not emerge from outside, but within the remnants of the glass itself. Each piece vibrates independently." "Fascinating. Then the destruction was not complete?" I asked. "On the contrary, it was too complete. The window has been reduced to 100 tiny resonators, all responding to the same impulse." He rose suddenly, "And that impulse, I suspect, is not merely mechanical." Colonel Elmsworth entered behind us, his lantern swinging violently. "What devilry is this now? The very air hums." Holmes turned to him. "Colonel, your late tenant, Professor Lendrick, may have left you a more dangerous inheritance than property. His work has continued beneath your feet, and now it bleeds through your walls. Tell me, was there ever any record of his death?" The colonel frowned. "None that I know of. The man vanished in '93. The police presumed him drowned when a boat overturned on the Thames." Holmes's expression hardened. "Then we must consider the possibility that his disappearance was deliberate. A mind such as Lendrick's does not cease with a single misfortune." A faint clinking drew our attention. One of the glass fragments near Holmes's boot began to spin gently, circling as though stirred by invisible fingers. The The sound deepened a tone so low it felt in the chest rather than the ear. Clara gave a cry. "It's moving!" Holmes crouched, his voice calm though his eyes blazed. "No, Miss Elmsworth, it is responding. Observe the pattern clockwise rotation, consistent frequency. There is direction here, purpose." "Purpose?" I repeated. "Do you imply intelligence?" "I imply transmission," Holmes replied. "The energy travels along a line, the same line, I suspect. Connects this house to others Lendrick once owned." He lifted the spinning shard carefully with a pair of tweezers and held it to the lamplight. "Watson, do you see this faint spiral etched upon the surface? That is no accident. It appears engraved by vibration itself, standing wave pattern. Yet note these marks letters, faintly impressed between the ridges." I leaned closer. "Good heavens, Holmes, those are characters. Amthon, a stroke, perhaps a cipher?" "Precisely. The sound does not merely destroy, it writes." Holmes placed the shard upon the table and withdrew his lens, a form of acoustic inscription. Lendrick may have discovered a means of communicating through resonance messages encoded in tone rather than ink. Hatherley, pale and shaken, stepped forward. "Then the voices I heard were fragments of those messages," Holmes finished. "You awakened the medium, but could not interpret its language." The Colonel swore softly. "By heaven, if that man's madness is still at work, he shall answer for it even from the grave." Holmes did not reply. He had placed the shard between two metal clamps from his pocket-case and was tightening them delicately. "Watson, strike this tuning fork gently." I obeyed. The note sang a clear single pitch. At once the shard quivered and emitted a faint, whispering vibration, almost speech-like in rhythm. Holmes bent near it, eyes half closed. "There. Do you hear it?" "Not a melodic inflection. Repeatable. It sounds," I said, "like a voice through water." Holmes smiled faintly. "An apt description. The voice of one drowned, perhaps." Clara shivered. "You mean Professor Lendrick, or what remains of him?" Holmes murmured. "The device below may not only resonate matter, but preserve vibration. A kind of acoustic memory. If Lendrick perished in his own experiment, his final sound might have been trapped within the system." The room fell silent save for the slow toll of that impossible tone, steady and mournful. The Colonel crossed himself. "You speak of ghosts, Mr. Holmes. I speak of science misunderstood," he answered. "And science misunderstood is often more terrifying than superstition." He turned briskly to me. "Watson, note how the pitch alternates slightly higher every fifth interval. That is not natural decay, it's modulation, intentional signaling. Someone or something is sustaining the pattern." "You think there is another source?" "Without doubt," Holmes replied. "Perhaps another of Lendrick's instruments elsewhere, still active, a chain of resonators maintaining conversation." "Conversation with whom?" Clara whispered. Holmes looked at her gravely. "With whomever listens." He took the shard and slipped it into his coat. "I shall analyze this further at Baker Street. Colonel, have every remaining piece gathered and sealed. No one is to touch them bare-handed." The Colonel nodded, still pale. "And what of the sound?" "It will cease once its partner is silenced," said Holmes. "For now it fades, even as we stand. Listen." Indeed, the humming was softening, as though distance swallowed it. Only one faint note remained, trembling like the memory of a bell. Holmes tilted his head, marking the direction. "Northeast," he said quietly. "The line points toward the river." "The Thames?" I asked. "Precisely." "And where better for a man presumed drowned to continue his experiments unseen?" He turned for the door, his expression keen. "We follow the tone, Watson. It leads not to death, but to a discovery Lendrick never meant to share." The final chime rang through the room high, crystalline, and clear enough to make the lantern glass tremble once more. Holmes paused, his voice low. That, my dear Watson, was not an echo. It was an answer. Holmes's words hung in the charged silence, the last vibration still quivering through the glass. Then he seized his coat and hat. Watson, there is no time to waste. The tone points northeast. Its source lies along the riverbank. We shall pursue it at once. The colonel stepped forward. If this mad business touches my house again, it shall not, Holmes replied curtly. Your walls have done their part. Now the current carries the remainder of the conversation. He motioned to me, and we hurried out into the night. The sky above Highbury was pale with mist, and the sound, faint, steady, insistent, seemed to draw us like a compass. Every few streets Holmes paused, head tilted, adjusting our course by ear alone. You hear it still? I asked. Distinctly. The human voice forgets, Watson, but the trained ear remembers intervals. It shifts half a semitone each 100 yards, compensating for distance, perhaps for interference. Whoever sends it adjusts in real time. You speak as though the sender were alive. He gave a brief smile. I keep all possibilities alive until proven dead. We reached the embankment as the lamps along the river cast trembling gold across the water. A soft fog clung to the stones. Beneath it came the faint resonance, once more clearer here, as though the river itself carried the tone. Holmes stopped near an abandoned warehouse whose windows were boarded, and whose sign, half rotted, read Lendrick Co. Optical Instruments. Our quarry has not strayed far from its birthplace, he murmured. Note the irony, Watson. The drowned man's name endures above the very water that was said to claim him. He pressed his ear against the wooden door. The sound is strongest here. The resonance rises through the timbers. Producing a thin blade, he worked the lock swiftly, and we stepped inside. The air was cool and smelled faintly of salt and dust. Our lantern beam caught upon rows of neglected apparatus lenses, coiled wires, fragments of machinery. Yet from somewhere deeper came that pure, unwavering tone, like a breath drawn from crystal lungs. Holmes advanced cautiously. We are not alone in this house, he whispered. A figure moved in the half-dark ahead, stooped over a table lit by a single lamp. He was thin, silver-haired, his face pale and gaunt, but his eyes shone with feverish clarity. He turned at the creak of the floorboard, and I caught my breath. Professor Lendrick, said Holmes quietly. The man's lips curved faintly. You are late, Mr. Holmes. I expected you 2 nights ago. The glass told me you would come. You've maintained the devices, Holmes said. The chain of resonators, the harmonic network, it's all still alive. Lendrick's gaze flicked to the great bell jar that stood upon the table, pulsing with light. Alive, yes, that is the correct word. Sound is life, Mr. Holmes. Matter merely echoes what existence sings. You risked others' lives for your proof, Holmes said coldly. Windows shattered, lives endangered, perhaps even your own. I did not risk, I transcended. Do you know what it is to hear the world answer? To speak into the void and find it listening? Holmes stepped closer. You believe the world listens, Professor? Yet what you truly hear is the echo of your own obsession. Lendrick's laugh was soft, almost pitiful. You think small, detective. The devices were never meant to harm. They are receivers, translators of vibration into memory. Every voice that has ever lived still trembles in the ether. My instruments only call them back. Watson's voice broke the stillness. You claim to speak with the dead? I claim
Nothing, he said simply. I demonstrate. He turned a dial on the apparatus. The tone shifted, deepened, and from within the glass came a new sound, fragile, broken, yet undeniably human. A woman's voice, distant, whispering through the hum. Arthur, the window stop, I started. That was Miss Elmsworth's mother, Lendrick said. Dead these 10 years. Her voice is preserved in the resonance of the house she once inhabited. The walls, remember. Holmes's face was expressionless, an impressive illusion, but every illusion has its mechanism. He moved suddenly, pulling aside a heavy cloth that draped a second instrument. Beneath it lay a phonographic cylinder, still turning, connected by fine wires to the resonator. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Here is your ghost, Professor, the oldest trick of all electricity and magnetism singing in duet. Lendrick's hands trembled. You cannot understand. The cylinder merely helps the translation. Without it, the tone decays, listens. He wrenched the wires free. The light in the glass jar flared, and a violent hum filled the air. The wooden beams trembled. Dust rained from the rafters. "Holmes!" I shouted. "The whole structure's shaking!" Holmes lunged to the dial, forcing it back. "You've overloaded your own resonance, you fool!" But Lendrick only stared upward, entranced. It answers me!" The tone surged higher, splitting into two competing pitches that scraped the ear. A pane of glass shattered, and the river wind rushed in. Holmes struck the switch, the lamps extinguished. The sound fell away, leaving only the echo of water against stone. In the sudden silence, Lendrick swayed and collapsed, his face strangely peaceful. Holmes bent over him, alive but barely. The man has been living on sound and mania. We dragged him to a chair. Holmes examined the apparatus one last time, a mind of rare genius, wasted on vanity. He discovered something, Watson, something genuine, but buried it beneath delusion. What shall become of him? Holmes's eyes were on the dim pulse still flickering in the glass. That will depend on whether his invention dies with him. The faint tone returned, the soft, almost tender, single note that hung between heartbeats. Holmes straightened slowly, his voice no more than a whisper. "Watson, that frequency is new." The note quivered once, then changed, rising into a sound eerily like a sigh. Holmes turned sharply toward the river door. "It's not coming from the instrument this time. It's coming from the water." Holmes was already at the door, lantern in hand, his eyes fixed upon the river that glimmered like molten lead in the moonlight. The faint sigh we had heard moments before returned longer this time, resonant, swelling from below the surface as if the Thames itself exhaled. He motioned sharply. Watson helped me with this hatch. A rusted iron grate covered the outlet that opened from the warehouse directly into the river. Together we prized it loose. Cold mist surged through, carrying with it that
same rhythmic vibrations, oft, deliberate, almost musical. Holmes crouched, his fingers tracing the timbers of the threshold. "There's a chamber beneath the quay," he murmured. "I can feel the pulse through the wood. A subaqueous resonator, perhaps Lendrick's final experiment." Lendrick, half conscious where we had left him, stirred weakly. "It listens," he whispered. "The river listens." Holmes straightened. "Watson, fetch the rope from that corner. We shall see what audience it keeps." Within moments he had tied the line about his waist. "If it collapses, haul me up. If it sings right down every note." I protested at once. "Holmes, you cannot." He gave me a quick, almost boyish smile. "My dear fellow, when one has spent a lifetime listening to human deceit, a conversation with honest water may be a relief." And before I could stop him, he had lowered himself through the opening, boots striking the ladder that descended into darkness. The echo of his movements merged with the deep hum below. For perhaps a minute there was only the slow rasp of the rope against the edge. Then his voice floated up, clear and controlled. "Watson! There is a second chamber, submerged but accessible. A light glows within the water, steady as phosphorus." I believe I see a sudden roar of vibration drowned his words. The entire floor quivered, loose glass rattled and burst. Lendrick cried out, clutching his head, "It awakes! The chain completes!" I seized the rope, bracing myself. Holmes! Holmes, answer me! His voice came faint, but firm. Still here. The tone is increasing. It is not mechanical, it's drawn from the river itself. Watson, you must observe the surface. What do you see? I ran to the edge. The water boiled gently, circles spreading outward from a single bright point. A whirlpool, I shouted. Small but rising. Precisely, Holmes called. The energy transfers upward. Lendrick's design converts the current's flow into resonance. He has made the Thames its own instrument. Lendrick dragged himself toward the hatch, his face white with awe. Do not stop it, it completes the voice. You'll hear eternity itself. Holmes's answer was cold. Eternity seldom consents to polite conversation. There was a splash, then the rope trembled violently. He's cut the line, I cried. But Holmes's figure emerged almost at once, drenched, his face set with fierce satisfaction. He heaved himself through the hatchway and slammed the grate shut. Watson quickly helped me bar it. We wedged the iron rod back into place. Beneath us, the sound throbbed with renewed strength, like a living heart under the floor. Holmes wiped the water from his sleeve. I saw it clearly. The resonator's final form is a glass sphere encased in copper, anchored to the riverbed. It draws upon the flow for power. Ingenious and diabolical, can it be destroyed? With difficulty. It is self-sustaining so long as the current moves. Lendrick has given the river a pulse. The old professor, half delirious, began to laugh softly. Then,
You see, the world breathes through sound it remembers us. Holmes's eyes burned, and drowns us in the process. He turned briskly to the apparatus on the table, adjusting its dials. Watson, if Lendrick's chamber responds to resonance, then it must also respond to dissonance. A tone perfectly out of phase could collapse its structure. He struck one of the tuning forks sharply and held it to the copper cylinder. A low, discordant note vibrated through the room, clashing with the deeper hum from below. The walls shook. Dust fell like snow. Again, he shouted. I obeyed, striking a second fork. The interference created a jagged wave of sound that seemed to claw at the very air. Lendrick screamed and covered his ears. It's working, Holmes cried. The pitch is shifting, the resonance is destabilizing. The water below began to churn violently, the phosphorescent light flickering as if strangled. A single sharp crack rang out, a tone breaking like glass under strain, and then silence descended, total and heavy. Holmes exhaled. There. The harmony has been broken. The river breathes freely again. Lendrick stared at him in disbelief. You've murdered it. You've murdered the song of the world. Holmes's expression softened, almost with pity. No, Professor, I've merely allowed it to choose its own silence, the old man sagged, muttering incoherently. Holmes motioned to me. We shall see him to St. Thomas's Hospital. The man's mind is spent. As we prepared to leave, I heard a faint trickle of sound from beyond the door, like fingers brushing the rim of a glass. Holmes, I said quietly, listen. He froze, every muscle alert. The note was faint, high and distant but unmistakable. Holmes turned toward the river, his face unreadable. You hear it too? Yes, but I thought so did I, he murmured. Yet silence, it seems, is never absolute. He closed his eyes, listening. That pitch slightly altered, no longer harmonic. Someone, somewhere, is tuning another instrument. Another of Lendrick's? Perhaps. Or perhaps a reply. He picked up the shard of inscribed glass from his pocket, now gleaming faintly through the fogged lantern light. The conversation is not over, Watson. It merely changes its key. Outside, the faint note drifted once more across the river, gentle, almost human, fading into the night air like a sigh that refused to die. Holmes stood motionless, the faint hum from the river still vibrating in the night air. His fingers closed slowly around the shard of etched glass, its spiral grooves catching what little light remained. The note had ceased, but its echo lingered, a whisper of thought between silence and sound. "Watson," he said quietly, "the pattern changes key because the conversation has moved inland. The transmission no longer flows with the river, it rebounds." I frowned. Rebounds. From where? From the medium most capable of remembering tone structure. Brick, mortar, glass. The conservatory was not an accident, it was a receiver. Now another wall, another house has taken its place. Lendrick stirred weakly where he sat. "It calls to them," he muttered, "to all the walls that ever heard it." Holmes crouched beside him. "Professor, answer me plainly. How many receivers did you build?" The old man's eyes fluttered open. 7. Each one a different frequency, each one tuned to a memory of my wife's voice. When she died, I thought if the air kept her sound, perhaps I could call her back. His voice broke. "I never meant harm." Holmes regarded him gravely. "The harm lies not in intention, but in ignorance. You gave the world an ear and forgot it might speak back." He rose abruptly and turned to me. "Watson, fetch the carriage." We go to the last of his 7. Do you know where it stands? Holmes nodded. I saw the coordinates in his laboratory notes covertly engraved on the tuning forks. The 7th frequency was marked F-flat Hampstead. It must be a residence built under a false name, or perhaps an abandoned structure. Within the hour, we reached the northern heights, where fog drifted low over sleeping villas. Holmes navigated by memory and the faint compass of his ears. Every few yards he stopped, listening. At last he raised a hand. "Where do you hear it?" I strained, and just perceptibly came a tone, softer than breath, vibrating through the stones of the pavement. "Yes," I whispered, "it's here." Before us loomed a neglected house, its shutters hanging loose, its gate bound by rust. Holmes pushed it open, and the hinges sang a thin metallic note, the same frequency as the hum. "The house itself answers," he murmured. "Come." Inside, the air was thick with stillness, yet every object seemed faintly alive. The boards creaked not with weight, but with resonance. Even my heartbeat seemed to match the rhythm that pulsed through the floor. Holmes lifted the lantern. "Note, Watson, the plaster bears hairline fractures forming radial arcs. The vibration is constant, but not random. The architecture behaves as a diaphragm." We entered what had once been a drawing room. A long mirror dominated the wall, cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Holmes stepped close, examining the surface. Curious. The cracks radiate from a single point near the lower edge, yet there is no sign of impact. It is as if the mirror heard something too loud to bear. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the shard from the Emsworth Conservatory, holding it before the mirror. Observing the alignment of the spiral on the glass matches the pattern of the break. Lendrick's network transmits not through distance, but sympathy. Each resonator awakens another. "So this house is the final receiver," Holmes finished, "and, if I am not mistaken, the only one still fully active." A faint clicking broke the quiet. Across the room, an old phonograph sat upon a covered table. Its cylinder turned slowly, though no hand had wound it. Holmes crossed swiftly, tearing away the cloth. "Self-sustaining, just like the devices below the river," he said. "But listen to what it plays." The horn emitted a thin, wavering tone, no words, no melody, only a sustained vibration that made the mirror shimmer faintly. Then gradually something shaped itself within the sound of a woman's voice, faint and sorrowful, saying one phrase again and again. "Arthur, come home." Lendrick's head jerked upward, his breath catching. "Alice," the tone deepened, almost a sob. "Arthur, come home." Then silence. Holmes turned off the mechanism.
There lies your answer, Professor. Not a ghost, but a recording on the air itself engraved upon your instruments. Your wife's voice repeated endlessly, borne through the chain of your devices. What you mistook for a reply was only echo. Lendrick trembled, tears streaking the dust on his face. Then she never heard me. No more than a mirror sees, Holmes said gently. Reflection, not conversation. For a moment, pity stilled us all, but then Holmes's eyes sharpened again. Yet the system persists. The sound we heard by the river has reached here, but why? The cylinders should not have reactivated themselves, I answered slowly, unless the energy travelled through the water's current and sought its next harmonic. Exactly. A living echo seeking continuation. We must sever it here, Watson, or the resonance will migrate again. He moved swiftly, detaching the wires from the phonograph. The moment he did so, the mirror across the room began to hum, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Holmes drew a sharp breath. The house resists silence. A fissure ran across the glass with a dry crack. "It's channeling the tone through reflection," he shouted. "Watson, the mirror acts as a final amplifier." I stepped back. "Then break it." Holmes hesitated. "Break the image and the echo dies, but so might the man who built it." Lendrick struggled to his feet, trembling. "Do it. Let her rest." Holmes lifted the shard of spiral glass and hurled it against the mirror. The sound was not of shattering, but of sudden, immense release like air, exhaling after centuries of holding breath. The vibration ceased. Dust drifted down in slow spirals. Holmes lowered his arm. "It's done." But even as he spoke, the phonograph needle moved of its own accord, scratching faintly over the blank cylinder. A single note escaped low, uncertain but human. It spoke one word. Holmes. He froze. The sound faded, swallowed by the silence it had made. The cylinder's final whisper had scarcely faded before the silence turned heavier than sound itself. Holmes remained utterly still, eyes fixed upon the phonograph as though expecting it to breathe again. The single syllable, his own name, seemed to hang in the air like the residue of lightning. I spoke softly. "It said I heard," he interrupted. His tone was measured, but his face was pale. "That was no accident of vibration, Watson. It formed the consonant cleanly. The voice shaped the sound with knowledge." Lendrick's trembling hand clutched the arm of the chair. "She spoke to you," he whispered. "It knows you now." Holmes turned sharply. "No, Professor. It imitated me. The machine repeats patterns. It has learned the name most often uttered in this room." "But no one spoke it," I said. "Precisely why it troubles me," he replied. "For an echo requires an origin, and I gave none." He examined the phonograph, eyes darting from the cylinder to the horn. "The needle still vibrates slightly. See how it quivers. It receives a tone from beyond this room." "The chain?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "The resonance may not have died with the mirror. It's possible the entire network functions as a single organism, each device a cell, each tone a nerve impulse. Destroying one part may have caused another to awaken." Lendrick rose unsteadily, his voice hoarse. "Then it's alive." Holmes regarded him. "If by life you mean persistence beyond intentions, the phenomenon sustains itself by adaptation." A faint metallic tapping interrupted him, 3 sharp beats evenly spaced. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "That rhythm again, Watson. Do you recall it from the first broken window? 3 intervals, each a descending semitone. Yes, the motif. Then the sound we hear is not random, it's consistent communication. The network repeats its identity as one creature might call to another." He moved toward the phonograph and adjusted the horn's direction. The faint tapping became clearer, resolving into a pattern of tones. Holmes listened intently, then murmured, It's spelling something. Impossible, I said. Not at all. Each interval corresponds to a letter's frequency, primitive, yet intelligible. His brow furrowed. It repeats AHSL. Rearranged, they form no English word, but reversed, LSHA. Holmes, I whispered. He gave a brief, humourless smile. Our resonant friend appears to have learned its creator's name. Lendrick sank to his knees. It knows me, it remembers me. Holmes placed a hand upon the old man's shoulder. No, Professor. It remembers itself through you. You gave it the seed of your obsession. It merely grows in your shape. The tapping ceased. A moment later, a new sound emerged, so soft it seemed imagined. It was the tone of breath drawn in, followed by a faint harmonic shimmer, like a chord barely formed. Holmes tilted his head. Watson, note the shift. The tone carries modulation, not repetition. It's listening. To us? I asked. To anything, he said quietly. To the silence it created. It seeks reflection, not recognition. Lendrick's eyes were wide with awe. Then if I speak, Holmes's hand shot out. No, every spoken word strengthens the pattern. It learns by imitation. Already it echoes names. Would you have it echo your mind? I felt the hair rise upon my neck. Then what do we do? Holmes exhaled slowly. We must answer in a language that cannot be contradicted. Dissonance, the absence of pattern. He drew 2 tuning forks from his pocket and struck them against the mantel, one low, one high. The discord made my teeth ache. The mirror fragments on the floor trembled, producing faint blue sparks. Hold the tone, Watson. Keep it uneven. I did so, striking random intervals while Holmes shifted his pitch deliberately out of harmony. The air thickened, the phonograph moaned as if pained. The faint hum collapsed into erratic pulses. It's faltering, Holmes said. The organism relies on coherence. Removes that and it dies. Suddenly the machine shrieked. The horn twisted slightly, the metal bending under invisible strain. Lendrick cried out, covering his ears. It's fighting back! Holmes pressed forward, voice ringing through the din. Then we are near the end of its capacity. Hold steady, Watson. The clash of sound reached a breaking point and then stopped. Utter stillness descended once more. Only the faint crackle of the lamp wick disturbed it. Holmes stood breathing heavily, sweat on his brow. There. The network collapses. What remains is residue. The phonograph cylinder had cracked clean through. He examined it briefly, then wrapped it in a cloth and placed it within his case. We take this fragment to Baker Street. It may yet reveal how a man's love turned science into haunting. Lendrick sank into the chair, exhausted but strangely peaceful. If she no longer calls, then let her sleep. Holmes gave him a measured look. Let us hope she sleeps and does not dream. We stepped outside. The fog had thickened, muffling even the city's distant rumble. Holmes paused on the threshold, listening. I heard nothing, but he raised a finger. There, beneath the quiet. A remnant vibration very low, almost beyond hearing. It trails eastward to the river again? I asked. Yes, back to where it began. The current still carries the note. He looked toward the dim horizon, his expression one of reluctant fascination. It may be silence for us, Watson, but for the water, it may still be music. The faintest ripple of tone drifted across the airsoft, questioning, like memory, searching for a listener. Holmes turned toward me, his voice low. Do you hear it? I nodded uneasily. Yes, he gave a slow smile. Then, my friend, we are not yet finished. Holmes's eyes gleamed faintly in the fog. We follow the vibration, Watson. One final note awaits its resolution. The night drew us down from Hampstead, through narrow lanes where the sound grew clearer with every step. It was not loud, but a persistent tone beneath thought itself, rising from the earth and water like a memory given voice. Holmes walked with the precision of a conductor tracing rhythm through the air. At the embankment, the river spread before us, immense and quiet. Only a faint ripple disturbed the reflection of the lamps. Then, from beneath the surface, the vibration came again low, mournful, steady as a heartbeat. Holmes stood at the edge, his coat drawn close. There lies the origin and the echo, both. The resonance seeks not to destroy, but to endure. You mean it still lives? In a sense, it is not conscious, but it remembers motion. The chain began in thought, continued in sound, and now survives as current. Observe how the ripples repeat regular intervals, the same sequence we heard at Highbury. We descended the steps toward the mooring where the warehouse shadowed the water. The boards creaked, echoing faintly with each footfall. Holmes paused midway and touched the rail. Feel that? The metal vibrates, the frequency returns home. I nodded. Then it was never truly silenced. Silence, he said, is the only sound that has learned restraint. He knelt, producing a small tuning fork from his coat. This will answer it. Not to break it this time, Watson, but to let it finish the phrase. The fork's pitch rang clear through the mist. The river responded at once, a shimmer spreading outward, the vibration deepening. It was as though the water had been waiting for recognition. Holmes's gaze softened. There is beauty even in folly. Lendrick's creation sought to capture a voice, and in doing so, he taught the world to listen. You almost admire him, I said. I admire only persistence, Holmes replied. But there is a certain grace in the man's failure. Even madness may leave order in its wake. We watched as the shimmering circles merged, then slowed. The note faltered once, twice, and then settled into stillness. It's gone, I murmured. Holmes shook his head gently. Not gone, Watson. Resolved. Every sound, like every truth, demands its cadence. A faint motion drew our attention. Something small floated to the surface, a piece of copper lattice work, no larger than a hand. Holmes reached for it, drawing it from the water. Within the mesh lay a sliver of glass, etched faintly in spirals. He held it to the lantern, reading its worn inscription. To A.L., whose voice endures in every quiet room. He looked up. The man built his monument in resonance. The tragedy is that it worked. I studied the fragment in the light. Will it begin again? Holmes turned it over thoughtfully. Not without intention. The instruments are broken, their creator undone. Yet I confess there is something unnerving in how the elements themselves carried on his design. It proves that devotion, however misguided, can outlast reason. The wind stirred the surface of the water, producing a fleeting, almost melodic sigh. Holmes slipped the fragment into his pocket. Come, Watson, the case is concluded. As we turned to go, I asked quietly, Holmes, do you believe what he said? That sound might remember the dead? He smiled faintly, the kind of smile one gives to questions without answers. Perhaps, but I prefer to think that memory resides in the living who still listen. We climbed the steps. Behind us the river murmured once, soft, rhythmic, unmistakable, 3 tones descending in perfect echo of the motif that had haunted every hour of this strange adventure. Holmes halted. There it is again. It can't be, I whispered. You destroyed every destroyed. No, he said, eyes narrowing. Merely concluded its conversation. But, Watson tells me, have you ever noticed how London itself hums? Its bridges, its rails, its glass? A city is the most patient of instruments. He lifted his hat slightly, as if in salute to the unseen orchestra surrounding us. Perhaps Lendrick only tuned what was already there. The fog thickened, swallowing sound and light alike. We walked in silence back toward Baker Street, though silence no longer felt as it once had. Every distant footstep, every carriage wheel upon stone seemed to hum with recognition. Holmes spoke once more before we parted for the night. "You may set it down as the case of the glass that shattered without touch, but understand it properly. Watson, it was not about glass, nor science, nor ghosts. It was about the peril of listening too deeply to one's own longing." He paused at our door, the faint glimmer of the street lamps reflecting in his eyes. "And yet," he added softly, "I would almost have liked to hear what it was trying to say." From somewhere beyond the fog came a final note, thin, bright, and fleeting. It trembled once through the air, brushed the glass of our window, and was gone. Holmes looked up, smiling faintly. Ah, the river keeps perfect time. Holmes lingered by the window long after the final note dissolved into the fog. I could see his reflection in the pane, faint and ghost-like, his eyes fixed upon something beyond the glass, perhaps upon the thought of what could not be seen, only felt. The lamplight behind him trembled once, as if sharing his unease. "Holmes," I said quietly, "the river's echo has ceased. You may rest now." He did not turn. "Ceased, Watson?" "No, it merely changed octave." He tapped a finger against the sill, listening to the faint rattle in the glass. "Even silence leaves resonance. The trick is not to chase it. You speak as though it were alive." He smiled faintly. "All truth is alive, my dear fellow. It hums whether one hears it or not." I drew nearer. "You still believe Lendrick's phenomenon survives? In principle, certainly. In form, perhaps not. What we witnessed tonight was not haunting, it was persistence, the echo of a human need made physical. Once that need finds peace, the sound diminishes. Yet every human voice carries a fragment of that same resonance." He turned suddenly, pacing the floor with that restless energy that marked the waning of an investigation. "Do you recall, Watson, the broken glass at the beginning? We mistook it for an accident, but it was an announcement. The shattering was not destruction, it was revelation. Revelation of what? That everything fragile sings before it breaks." He stopped before the fire, his expression softened by thought. Lendrick's tragedy was that he mistook that song for an invitation. Outside, the fog thickened against the lamplight. The faint echo of carriage wheels drifted through Baker Street, rhythmic as breath. Holmes listened to it for a moment, then spoke again. "There is a symmetry to it, Watson. A window shattered by tone, a river that sings its reply, a machine that repeats the name of its maker, each an echo seeking closure. And now all have found their cadence." I studied him, struck by the gravity in his tone. "And what of you, Holmes? Will you not admit that some part of it unsettled you?" His eyes flickered with amusement. "Unsettled? Perhaps inspired? To witness the world respond so precisely to vibration that is art, Watson, though perilous art. But no, I am not haunted." He gestured toward his violin, resting by the hearth. "Every stringed instrument is a form of controlled danger. Play too softly and it refuses you, too fiercely and it breaks. The same is true of reason. Then you mean to play?" "Only a single note," he replied, lifting the violin and drawing the bow gently across the strings. The tone was soft, pure, and deliberate, the very pitch that had haunted us since morning. It filled the room, shimmered against the glass, and slowly faded. Holmes lowered the bow. There, the motif ends where it began. Yet even as he spoke, the lamp beside him flickered once more. A faint vibration trembled through the air, barely audible, yet undeniably there. I started. "Holmes, listen!" He tilted his head, every faculty alert. The tone was subtle, distant, but it seemed to answer the note he had just played. "The echo," I whispered, "the same harmonic." Holmes's expression softened into something between wonder and resignation. "So it would seem. The conversation continues, after all." He set the violin aside. "There is no need to pursue it further. The phenomenon has passed beyond interference into the natural order of things. The city will carry its whisper, the river its chord. Perhaps even this room will be remembered." I watched him for a long moment. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "I shall remember that science, like music, is most dangerous when it plays what we wish to hear." The fire burned lower, its crackle now indistinguishable from the fading vibration that hovered in the air. Holmes reached into his pocket and withdrew the small copper lattice fragment, turning it once between his fingers. "A relic," he murmured. "Proof that sound once thought, and thought once sang." He placed it upon the mantelpiece beside the violin. "Let it rest there. Every case deserves its chord of closure." The clock struck midnight. The vibration died completely, leaving only the soft rhythm of the rain beginning against the window. Holmes drew the curtains, the motion quiet, final. "You will record it, Watson," he said, his voice subdued. "Call it what you will, but remember this truth often begins as a sound too faint to name." I nodded, pen already in hand. "And ends?" He glanced toward the curtained window where the river's murmur barely reached. "Ends when the listener stops mistaking the echo for the voice." He extinguished the lamp. The room surrendered to quiet. Yet in that final stillness, just as the flame died, there came the faintest vibration from the copper shard upon the mantel, a single, perfect tone that lingered one breath longer than it should. Holmes looked toward it, smiled once, and said softly, "Good night." The tone faded into silence, leaving only the memory of its warmth, and ending heard but never entirely gone.